Last week, congressional Democrats staged a sit-in right on the floor of the House chamber, trying to make sure the nation heard their frustration over a lack of action on gun control, and it did. The Democrats, led by Katherine Clark and legendary civil rights activist John Lewis, spent more than 25 hours camped out. When the Republicans announced the recess and the C-SPAN cameras went off, the protesters turned to social media and the live streaming app Periscope to get their message out. And although the sit-in has ended, they say their fight continues and the backlash against the action has just begun. In a weekend interview with the Milwaukee station WISN, House Speaker Paul Ryan called the whole thing, quote, a low moment for the People's House. And he declared that when Congress reconvenes, quote again, we are not going to handle it the same way. We will not take this. We will not tolerate this. Joining me now, Congresswoman Katherine Clark, who, as I mentioned, spearheaded last week's protest. Congresswoman, good to see you. Thanks, and Congressman Michael Capuano, who participated. Good to see you, too, Congressman. You're given credit for initiating this thing. You deserve the credit, yes?
Well, I certainly had a first conversation with John Lewis, who really came up with the idea of having a sit-in.
The legendary John Lewis, as we all know from Selma.
Civil rights.
Yes, exactly. But what were you thinking, man? Why did this pop into your head all of a sudden as a tactic?
It really was frustration over the moments of silence that we have, which should be the beginning of action for Congress when we have these horrific mass shootings. But we never act. We have the moments of silence, they're heartfelt, but there's no action. And after Orlando, I believe that was the 8th moment of silence since I've been in Congress for a mass shooting. I just started asking people in the chamber, what can we do? Let's not let this fade away again. Let's demand some results from this carnage.
I'm smiling at you only because John King from CNN, who's on a radio show every Tuesday today, said, and he plays it right down the middle, how awesome is it that they had a sit-in with John Lewis?
Well, right?
Even he was impressed. So Mike Capuano, a murder in an elementary school, a murder in a church, an attempted assassination of one of your colleagues, that didn't do it. Why will Orlando and a sit-in change anything?
Like everything else, there's always a last straw. We've been trying for months to get these bills on the floor, using every parliamentary tactic we can use, using every rule we can use, and it hasn't worked. Not only, again, we're not trying to change people's minds. I think America is with us. We're simply trying to get a vote on a couple of very simple issues, and people want to vote no, vote no.
Was that the expectation that they will vote no and then it's used against them in November elections? You don't expect to win this vote in July, do you? Assuming that Ryan allows there to be a vote?
I don't know. I'm hoping that there are a lot of moderate Republicans that were kind of very uncomfortable this week because they know that they have to go home. We're home this week on a break. They're home too, and they're hearing from their constituents. I mean, some of the more extreme right-wingers, no, they're not going to change their mind. But some of the more moderate Republicans may be forced to open their hearts a little bit more.
And the things you're expanding the background checks and people on the terror watch list or the whatever the no-fly list, that's no-fly, no-buy, that's what you're contemplating doing. When Paul Ryan says things like, we're never going to succumb here because there's a due process issue, and I assume what he means is there are a lot of people who are on those lists who don't deserve to be. Ted Kennedy, by the way, being one not so long ago. Isn't there some merit to that some people end up there for absolutely no reason, don't even know they're on the list until they try to buy a gun or they try to fly?
I think it's a very fair criticism, and my answer to that is that let's have a vote. Let's have the debate, let's have a negotiation, and let's have a vote. If you really want to see the cynicism around this, first of all, I've heard nothing from the speaker about universal background checks, which are so widely supported. Upwards of 90% of Americans agree on it. But you really want to look at their cynicism. They won't even lift a ban on federal research into gun violence. So if you really
by the CDC, right? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, so if you really want to say this isn't the right way to go, then how about funding something that would show us the right way?
I think they got to read the bill that's put before them. The bill that's put before them is sponsored by Peter King, a Republican from New York. It was sponsored when George Bush was still the president. This is not a new item. And in the bill itself, it has a 60-day period whereby if you think you're on the list inappropriately, you can have an appeal to a judicial system.
Does it help you at all?
The concerns they have are false concerns. And if they had any real concerns about them and they don't like what's in the bill already, they could certainly offer amendments. They are the majority.
You mentioned Peter King, a Republican. You may have to swallow hard answering this one. Does it help that Donald Trump broke ranks with the NRA, which endorsed him, or at least appears to have, about a week or so ago, when he said he wants to see action on this no-fly
You're right,
list
I
thing
do have
too.
to swallow hard.
I know, but
it doesn't hurt. I mean, again, 90% of America is with us. I don't think it's a real difficult choice for someone running for president.
So, by the way, tell the truth. You got to raise your right hand and say, either of you know anything about Periscope or Facebook Live before this? Tell the truth.
I had heard of Periscope, never used it.
Not Periscope, I knew about the Facebook.
So
No.
a couple of your members did this. It violates the House rules, from what I understand. To
Yes,
be
it does.
broadcasting from there, there are also some potential ethical violations. Some of your colleagues allegedly raised some money off, using House resources. Does any of that bother you? I mean, this is a civil disobedience kind of thing. You did technically violate the rules of the chamber that you serve in. Does that trouble you? You don't care?
The whole point of it was civil disobedience and violating some of the rules. If they had left the mics and the cameras on, we would have respected the rules around photography as well.
Let me be clear. We violated as few rules as we possibly could, number one. Number two is we didn't turn those cameras on right away. We actually kept them off for quite a while we tried to get the leadership to turn them back on. My whole
I mean,
role
Periscope, and that's what your own.
Right.
we didn't have that on for quite a while. It didn't come on for at least an hour and a half after we were on the floor. For that hour and a half, it was blank.
Yeah, why did this end? That's the only part I don't get. We're going to talk about July 5th in a couple of seconds. You had the nation's attention. Everybody was paying, even people who didn't like what you were doing for whatever reasons, on the merits, because you're violating the rules. Why don't you just sit there through this whole recess, let them go home, do their barbecues or whatever, meaning the opponents, Republicans and a few Democrats, I assume. Why don't you just stay there, Katherine Clark?
I think what we said was no bills, no break. And when they adjourned in the middle of the night, we kept it going for 24 hours, saying, for 1 minute of silence, we're going to be here for 24 hours. But once they adjourned and the resources, the lights, everything was going to be going off on us, we said, we'll be back. When we're in session again on July 5th, we will be back.
Are you sitting
with
in
the
on
pressure
July
on
5th?
it.
Is that what's happening? You're going to start sitting in until they vote on to give you a vote?
That hasn't been decided yet by anybody.
Has it been decided? You're just not telling me.
No, you have to understand, this wasn't something that was started from the top down. This was an organic thing. There were a handful of us, Catherine being one of them, me, John Larson, John Lewis,
Connecticut,
David
yeah.
Cicilline, that were kind of talking about this several days beforehand. I don't know about anybody else. I didn't expect it to last this long. I thought we'd go in, do our little thing. For instance, virtually nobody brought a battery charger for their cell phones.
Right.
They all had to be brought in at a later time because we didn't think this was going to happen. Number one. Number two is, as far as how long it was going to last, there was never any plan to sit there and say, let's go 24 hours. It just kind of happened once we get the support of our colleagues. I mean, otherwise it would have been a handful of us. We started off with 10 people pretty much on the floor.
Okay, so what are you going to do? I mean, Mike says the
That's being
decisions haven't been made.
discussed now.
What's your Congressman Capuano has? What happens on July 5th? He says he's not going to tolerate it. Meaning Ryan, he says there's not going to be a vote. When you've concluded there's not going to be a vote, what's the next strategy here, Congresswoman?
Well, we're going to keep going, and what form that's going to take specifically, we are having meetings this week to decide. But we are certainly not going to say, with about 8 days left in the session before we're
Right.
scheduled to leave for the Republican convention, that we're going to back down now.
Are you willing to be arrested? When Ryan said, as I quoted before, that I don't know if he's going to do that, I won't tolerate. I don't know what I won't tolerate it means. If he brought in the guards to arrest you, is that okay with you? Yes?
It's okay with me.
How about you?
There were a room full of police officers sitting downstairs waiting to be ordered to go in, and they weren't ordered to go in. If that's what the Speaker wants to do, we'll deal with it then. But in the meantime, again, there are many discussions going on. For one, I actually think that we need to allow the Speaker in a reasonable way out by having a discussion as opposed to threatening him with further action. All we want is a vote on the floor of the House. Put it on the floor, vote no if that's what you want, and that part of it's over.
We have one more minute here, very quickly. No matter how far you get, even if you get a vote, and even if you win this vote, I know you'd both acknowledge it surely doesn't solve the problem. You've begun to make incremental change. As long as cases like D.C. versus Heller, which for the first time said individuals have a right to bear arms under the Second Amendment, that's the first time it's ever. As long as cases like that stand, ultimately, there's never going to be enough out of Congress. Is there or is there?
Well, a friend of mine who's an engineer put it well this weekend. He said, I've never, with this argument that this won't solve everything, no scientist, no engineer looks at a problem and says, well, if I can't solve it all, I'll do nothing. And that's exactly what this Congress and the Republican leadership has said, we can't solve it all, so we're going to do nothing. We have to start somewhere, and I think what you heard from the members in the Democratic caucus, but more importantly from the American people who watched, they want someone to stand up and be a voice for that and say, this Congress must take some action.
They want you to stand up and sit down. Keep
That's
doing
right.
it. Representative, good to see you.
Thank you.
Congressman, good to see you as
Pleasure.
well. Thanks so much.